The mystery surrounding the Shroud of Turin is among Christianity's most significant artifacts, and things are about to get a lot more interesting. Just take a look at this clip from one of Dr. Taylor Marshall's podcasts.
A shroud by a man that was tortured the way Jesus was pierced through his side, had coins, his right side, yes, had coins on his eyes that were minted by Pontius Pilate, had pollen grains that were from Jerusalem, matched bloodstains on the Sudarium of Oviedo that is attributed to Jesus, and had a burst of ultraviolet radiation that caused a 3D image of this crucified body. It's got to be Jesus, you know?
Nearly 35 years ago, a report dismissed the relic as a medieval forgery. However, recent findings suggest a potential shift in perspective. Is it true that it has been a miraculous artifact from the beginning? You might want to stick to the very end of this video to witness the shocking reality behind the Shroud of Turin. The ongoing debate about the Shroud of Turin seems never-ending. Interest in this sacred piece of cloth fluctuates, but what exactly is it? Some within the Roman Catholic Church argue that it's the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, said to bear his supernatural image from head to feet, serving as evidence of his death and resurrection. Non-Catholics have also shown interest in the shroud, hoping for tangible proof to support their faith. This special cloth, called a shroud, has been kept in different churches since at least the 14th century, maybe even longer. It's in the town of Turin in Italy, which is why it's called the Turin Shroud. But if you wrap a cloth around a person, it usually doesn't show a clear picture of their body and face, right? Well, this is where it starts to get really interesting. Those who think the shroud is real suggest that when Christ came back to life, some kind of special energy from his body made a supernatural picture on the cloth. Pope Paul VI and Pope Sixtus IV have both expressed significant reverence for the relic. The cloth, approximately 14 feet long by 3.5 feet wide, first appeared in the mid-14th century. However, a French Catholic bishop, Pierre d'Arcis, quickly labeled it a forgery. It is indeed peculiar that there is no historical record of this remarkable burial cloth until over 1,000 years after Christ's death. The absence of any claim by the early disciples regarding this cloth with the image of their master is also noteworthy. Now, did you know that back in 1988, a team of global scientists conducted radiocarbon dating on fragments of the Shroud of Turin, a cloth believed by some to be associated with Christ's crucifixion? Surprisingly, the results indicated that the shroud likely originated between 1260 and 1390 AD, challenging its supposed connection to the 1st century AD. How could this belong to Jesus if it was more than 1,000 years younger than Jesus? Well, you may want to pay close attention to this next part. Shroud experts and investigators have questioned the accuracy of the dating, suggesting potential issues with contamination during testing. Microbiologist Professor Stephen J. Mattingly from the University of Texas even proposes that bacteria, not fire, might have influenced the carbon-14 dating results. The underlying science of radiocarbon dating is quite simple. Carbon, in the form of carbon-14, is naturally produced in the atmosphere and incorporated into living organisms. However, once an organism dies, it no longer takes in carbon-14, allowing scientists to estimate its age by measuring the remaining carbon-14. Mattingly argues that bacteria contamination on the shroud, which has come into contact with various species over centuries, could deter the dating results. He and his colleague have identified different bacteria on the shroud, including some that produce a peculiar material, potentially helping preserve the cloth. Interestingly, Mattingly suggests that bacteria might be responsible for the shroud's image. As the theory goes, bacteria in the wounds of the crucified man, forming a biofilm, could have left a faint imprint on the cloth, gradually darkening over time. To support this idea, Mattingly conducts experiments using bacteria of his own skin, producing a biofilm and transferring it onto a linen cloth. The result is a photograph-like image, indicating a possible link between bacteria, biofilm, and the mysterious shroud image. Ongoing experiments aim to isolate the compounds responsible for the observed color and enhance the quality of facial images. The proof supporting the Shroud of Turin being real is very strong. It's hard to think anyone with an open mind would see it as anything less than convincing. Even though many think research on the shroud ended with the carbon dating in 1988, did you know that it's actually been studied more than any other single object in history? And this is where things get really shocking. The main idea is that science has proven the image on the cloth is impossible to copy. One reason is that, as scientists now confirmed, the image on the shroud had to happen because of a strange burst of light, electromagnetic radiation. It was so powerful that it could even light up a whole stadium. In short, the proof shows the shroud was wrapped around a real body that just disappeared without ruining the perfectly shaped blood clots on the cloth. This could only happen through an event like the one described in the Gospels as the resurrection. The event that, as the Gospels say, freed Jesus' body from normal limits. The only proof that challenged the shroud's truth, the carbon dating, has now been proven wrong. New data from the carbon tests, released after 29 years, shows the tests were not for sure at all. Historical research also shows the shroud existed long before the carbon date that put it in the Middle Ages. Now, did you know that new dating tests have even dated the cloth to the 1st century? So the only thing that seemed to say the shroud wasn't real doesn't make sense anymore. 4 research papers written by 12 experts have been published in serious academic journals. They all agree that carbon dating was wrong and ask for new carbon dating to be done. Many shroud researchers, including nuclear engineer Robert A. Rucker and journalist Philip Ball, support this idea. But the Church should not hurry into more carbon-14 tests for a few reasons. One reason is that carbon dating the shroud will never be for sure because the cloth is dirty and because the tests would only ruin it further. When carbon dating was first suggested, a group of scientists said 7 samples from different parts of the cloth were needed for it to be believable, but the carbon daters only took 1 sample and broke it into 3 pieces. Why would the Church agree to ruin more of the cloth now, taking 7 more samples, especially when the latest proof shows the shroud has been made dirty by carbon-14? And why do it when the proof that the shroud is real is stronger than ever? Well, let's take a look at some of the most important tests, and this is where it gets even more interesting. So, one of these tests, wide-angle X-ray scattering, read the shroud to the 1st century. The results came out just last year from a team led by Dr. Liberto De Caro from Italy's National Research Council. The test doesn't ruin the cloth, and you can repeat it many times with just 1 sample. 3 other dating tests by Professor Giulio Fanti and others at the University of Padua also confirm the 1st century date. So why would the Church rush into more carbon dating of the shroud? Some researchers say the proof for the shroud being real is so strong that more dating isn't needed. The proof we now have shows that the image on the 4-meter-long cloth is an impossible image, something that can only be explained as a supernatural event. The image on the shroud has never been copied by science because the proof shows it can't be. It's a very detailed, photonegative, 3D image made by a change in tiny linen fibers. This change could only happen with a very exact burst of electromagnetic radiation from the body itself. And there's more proof for the shroud being real than most people know. Riddles of the Shroud list 99 pieces of proof supporting its truth. This proof includes tiny bits of the shroud of very rare soil found in Jerusalem and tiny bits of flower pollen from Jerusalem. There is also proof from chemicals in the blood on the cloth, showing it has a lot of bilirubin. This fits with a body that's gone through some kind of torture. But that's not even the best part, and you may want to pay special attention now. Dr. Michael Tite, who led the carbon dating, says that he now thinks the cloth wasn't made by a forger in the Middle Ages, as the carbon daters said in 1988. Dr. Tite said in an interview that he thinks the proof shows there really was a body in the cloth. He guesses the man on the shroud might have been a Christian crusader who was crucified as a way of making fun by Muslim troops. But this idea doesn't match the proof showing a supernatural event, not a natural one. Still, Dr. Tite's comments are important because he admits the shroud wasn't faked up by a forger like the carbon daters claimed in 1988. Proof for the shroud being real also comes from the forensic pathologists who say the shroud shows details about the body that people in the Middle Ages didn't know. The shroud supports all the details of the gospel story about Jesus' death and coming back to life. Now, did you know that according to the gospel story, the first person to believe in Jesus coming back to life was the apostle John? He went into the tomb, looked at the empty shroud, and believed that the coming back to life really happened. As John's story in his own gospel says, he saw and he believed. The shroud gives strong proof for the coming back to life, a proof so strong that it should convince any well-taught jury without a doubt that the shroud is real and that the coming back to life really happened. And as for doubters, they will be here till the end of time, exerting considerable effort to convince others that none of these events ever occurred.